Okay, I was going to do a live lecture on the birth of Helen, but as we can see, a lot of people are having technology problems, so we're doing it this way instead. You should have your notes prepped. It should look something like this, so that you have the people and the plot on sort of the 2/3 column, and on the 1/3 column, you're going to keep track of any vocabulary. Now, normally I'm not going to set your notes up for you. You're going to have to watch or read or do whatever the activity is, and then you are going to have to decide what are the important vocab terms and what are the important people and plot on your own. Now, if you notice, you don't have a lot of room here for plot, so you're going to have to make a really short summary of this, but hopefully a lot of the information will be under the various people. Helen's birth really begins with Tyndareus and Leda, who were married. And Leda was stunningly beautiful, and one day Zeus saw her. And as you know from the research you did on Zeus and Poseidon and many of the other Greek gods, if they saw someone beautiful, yeah, they were lusty. So Zeus definitely wanted to sleep with Leda, but she was not interested in sleeping with him. So he turned himself into a swan so that he could get close to her and impress her with his great beauty. And then he slept with her, and so she laid eggs. It's mythology. Don't look for logic. Just don't. So Leda laid 2 eggs, and out of those 2 eggs came 4 children. The 2 boys were Castor and Pollux, and the 2 girls were Helen and Clytemnestra. And the girls are definitely more important in mythology than the boys were. The boys are involved in a number of different stories. They have hero stories. At one point, as young teenagers, they have to go on a rescue mission because some guys had kidnapped their sisters, hoping to marry them because their sisters were stunningly beautiful and wildly underage. But apparently the stunningly beautiful thing kind of made them not care about the underage thing, which is hugely repugnant. But I'm not going to say that you're not going to run into that again in mythology. But 2 of the children, Helen and then one of the boys, I can't remember which, were actually the children of Zeus. They were divine. 2 of the children were actually the biological children of Tyndareus, Leda's husband. But Tyndareus loved all of these kids, and it really upset him that these men were so intractable, and they were insisting on really getting very aggressive with what his daughters. He didn't care that Helen was biologically Zeus's. That's his daughter. That's his little girl, just as much as Clytemnestra is. And both of them were so stunningly beautiful, particularly Helen. She was stunning. But still, Clytemnestra was second only to Helen. She was just equally as beautiful. And because the men were so intractable and so insistent, Tyndareus decided that he was going to kind of protect his little girls by making all of the suitors come and really kind of, well, court the girls, impress them, try and be honorable about this, as opposed to, kidnapping in the middle of the night, which is kind of not okay. Yeah. But so all of these Greek heroes, Menelaus, who later became king of Sparta. Right now, Tyndareus is king of Sparta, but later it's going to be Menelaus. His brother, Agamemnon. Odysseus, who is known as the wisest and trickiest of all of the Greek heroes. He doesn't have a big kingdom the way some others do. He is physically strong, yes, but he is more likely to win by tricking somebody than he is through fisticuffs. So he's not your most pugnacious Greek, but he is definitely a one who figures out how to win. All of these people ended up coming to try and court Helen. Now, Odysseus was a little worried. His fear was that if Helen picked him, and he was fairly sure he could get Helen to pick him, because after all, he's the sweet talker. He's the smart one. But if Helen picks him, you have all of these men who are far more renowned in terms of warfare, who have bigger armies, who have more ships, who have bigger islands to command. that all of these, his fear is that if Helen picks him, Ithaca is such a little island and he is not a terribly warlike king, that somebody's just going to come and steal her. So he goes to Tyndareus and says, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you make all of the men who come to court Helen vow, take an oath in front of the gods that they will defend Helen's marriage to the end. Now, in Odysseus's mind, this is brilliant. He is going to talk Helen into marrying him, and then all of these powerful kings are going to be committed to defending his marriage. So he's like win-win. Tyndareus thinks that's a great idea. So that's why it's called the Oath of Tyndareus. He makes all of these men vow to defend Helen, defend Clytemnestra, defend the marriage. And the courtship goes on. And Helen falls in love with Menelaus. Apparently, Odysseus was not that much of a sweet talker. So Clytemnestra is, of course, the also-ran, stunningly beautiful. And she falls in love with Menelaus's brother, Agamemnon. So you now have the two couples, Menelaus and Helen, who actually become king and queen of Sparta. They pick up from Tyndareus. And then Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. You might think, oh, poor Odysseus is out in the cold. No, actually, he isn't. When he was there courting Helen, he met Helen's cousin, Penelope, who was very beautiful. I mean, she wasn't a great beauty the way her cousins were. But as he talked to her, what Odysseus realized is that she was smart and she was clever and she was kind. And she really had a very sensible head on her shoulders. And so Odysseus fell in love with Penelope and he married her and he took her home to Ithaca. Now, for a while, everything seems to be going well. So you have all three married couples off having kids, off enjoying life. And then you had the hero Achilles. He's kind of off on the side. Achilles' parents were getting married. And the gods were all invited because Zeus threw the wedding, except for a goddess by the name of Eris. She was also known by her other name, Strife. She's one of Ares's kids. That's never a good thing. When Ares's name comes up, there's going to be trouble. And Eris, or Strife, because everywhere she went, she caused trouble, the gods were like, yeah, let's not have her at the wedding. And she was really very offended that they invited everyone else. They even invited Ares, but they would not invite her. So she decided to get revenge. Is this sounding a little bit like a fairy tale you might know? Yeah, a lot of Greek mythology does. Eris took a beautiful golden apple and put a label on it that said, for the fairest, and threw it into the middle of the wedding. Well, most of the goddesses were like, yeah, I'm not getting in the middle of that argument. However, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena all insisted that the apple was theirs because they were the most beautiful goddess. So Eris did in fact cause strife. So all three went to Zeus. Zeus, being smart, is like, oh, heck no, I'm not getting in the middle of this. Forget it. Tell you what, there's this mortal over there. His name is Paris. He is the prince of a great trading city, an enormous walled trading city called Troy. And he is very fair. In fact, he had a wager with Ares, and we all thought he was going to try and cheat, and he didn't. He even treated Ares fairly. So I tell you what, you go and you have Paris of Troy judge who is most beautiful. And then Zeus noped out because he was not going to get involved in this drama. So the three goddesses went to Paris, who said he couldn't decide. So the three goddesses then did two things. Weirdly, they stripped naked. Hey, look at me. Greek mythology. But the other thing they did was they all bribed him. Hera promised to make him a great leader over Asia and Europe. Athena promised him, infinite wisdom. Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. So Paris, being very young and apparently somewhat stupid, chose the least valuable of all of these gifts and named Aphrodite the most beautiful goddess in the world. Do keep in mind that with Greek mythology, every town would have slightly different variations to kind of make their gods, their favorite gods, and their favorite goddesses sound better. So there are some different versions in that. In some versions, the goddess is stripped naked. In some versions, they don't. There are even a few versions where there's no bribery involved and Paris just chooses Aphrodite. So if you've run into a different variation, that's because there are a lot of variations out there. But however it came about, Aphrodite promised to make the most beautiful woman in the world love Paris. The problem is the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, who was married to Menelaus. Aphrodite didn't really care. So what Aphrodite did is made Helen fall for Paris. Now, that story seems to strip some of the culpability away from Helen. And in a lot of the stories, she doesn't bear culpability for this. In a lot of the stories, she is enchanted by Aphrodite, and when the enchantment later breaks, she immediately regrets not being with her husband Menelaus. She regrets having married Paris once they reach Troy. She wants to go home to Sparta. In other stories, she's exceptionally culpable. In some stories, she revels in the fact that this is going to cause a war. She enjoys the bloodshed. And when the war is over, she, in fact, chooses to call out to her father, Zeus, and chooses to ascend to Mount Olympus rather than come back to come back to mortals, because she considers mortals to be little chess pieces to just have fun manipulating and then break all your toys and go home. So the character of Helen changes drastically depending on who's writing the story. But in every story, Helen does in fact leave with Paris, which is why she's often called Helen of Troy, because she was queen of Sparta first. But in Troy, she marries Paris and becomes a princess of Troy. So this is where the story would end, except for the oath of Tyndareus. All of the suitors had vowed that they would defend the marriage. So this has essentially now gone from an argument between Sparta and Troy, where, quite frankly, Troy was going to win. They were a huge trading city, huge walls. They had the backing of the Amazons. They had lots of gods on their side. Troy would have stomped Sparta into the ground. However, it's not Troy versus Sparta. Because of the oath of Tyndareus, Menelaus calls on every Greek hero who made that oath, which was basically all of them. Yeah. So all of the Greek heroes start coming together so that they can go to Troy as a whole, as a fleet, and attack and get back Helen. Now, who is the one hero who really didn't want to come? Ironically, that would be Odysseus. For him, the oath of Tyndareus was a way for him to kind of get his way. It's not something, he doesn't want to get dragged into a war on the other side of the world. Penelope has finally had their first child, a little boy who Odysseus dotes on. Sometimes you will hear him referred to him as Telemachus. It's a slightly more Greek pronunciation. Americans are more likely to call him Telemachus. But Odysseus adored him and he didn't want to leave home. So Menelaus sent a man named Palamedes to come and get Odysseus. And when Palamedes showed up, Odysseus is like, "Ooh, I'm insane. I'm crazy. You don't want me with you, do you? Because I'm nuts." And to prove his point, Odysseus took a bag of salt and acted like he thought it was seed and started sowing the ground with salt. Well, Ithaca is a small rocky island and it does not have much good cropland. And if you put salt in the ground, it destroys the ground. Nothing can grow there. So only a crazy man would put salt in his cropland. But Palamedes knew that this was Odysseus. So he trusted him about that much. So Palamedes actually took Telemachus out of his mother's arms and said, if Odysseus is that crazy, he's not going to recognize his son. He'll plow right over him. And so he put the baby right in front of the plow. At which point Odysseus stops the plow and is like, cotton picking, freaking, stinking, stupid Palamedes. Fine, I'm not crazy. I'll go to your stupid, stinking, cotton picking, freaking war. So Odysseus does become one of the heroes on the Greek side in the Trojan War, rather unwillingly, but he's there. He is the one who gets Achilles to join the battle. He fights in many of the battles. Does he kind of let it slide that Palamedes dragged him away from his family? No, he gets his revenge on Palamedes. And that man is very, very sorry that he was the one that got the crappy job of having to go get Odysseus for the battle. So that is where we sort of leave off. And that is the beginning of the Trojan War. The Trojan War is the story that's told in Homer's The Iliad. And the Iliad has chapters that are wildly fascinating. And then it has entire chapters that are nothing except descriptions of dead bodies and battles and blood and dead people being dragged behind chariots. And yeah, we're not reading that one. It's a little, I didn't like it that much. Anyway, it's got some great chapters in it, and I do want you to know the basic storyline. So you have an assignment to go read up, or rather watch some YouTube videos on the Iliad before you start reading the Odyssey. The Odyssey is the story of Odysseus, but you have to know where Odysseus has been to understand why he is so desperate to get home. Because that Trojan War was ugly. That was an exceptionally ugly war. And if you read the entire Iliad, you will know how exceptionally ugly that war was. So that is the birth of Helen. So fill in your notes, make sure that you know who all of these people are. And next up, the Iliad.